Yes, guys, the rumors are true. We got most correct predictions on the UFC predictions tracker. First place most profitable channel. First place most correct methods of victory. 10 out of 12 predictions correctly. The Tim Elliott prediction came true as well. I said he would submit him, like we said, and he got the submission. And look, I'm not gonna boast about this too long. The fight went exactly the way I said it would. It's whatever. The safety lock also comes through for the third week in a row now. Underdog City comes through with Drakkar Close and Leron Murphy, who Murphy was the underdog of the week as well. So lock of the week came through. Carlos Prates. Just a great week. Not even my best week, but one of the best weeks for sure. You know. So after this amazing week, first thing on the schedule is to switch up on my day ones. That's it. They're gone. I'm Hollywood now. Can't talk to them. Can't be seen with them. Nah, I'm just kidding, guys. Welcome to this week's prediction episode for UFC Fight Night Walker versus Mingyang. To be honest, this was probably the worst UFC card ever to break down because not only am I not familiar with most of these Chinese fighters, but when doing research on them, all of their names and their opponent names sound the exact same. So I was getting confused throughout the whole card, but that's just me keeping it real. I'm not familiar with these Chinese names like that, but I still did it. Yeah, I still did it anyways, just for the love of the game. Let's dive into the first fight of the night. We got Diyar Nurgozhay versus Uran Satybaldiev. I'm going with Diyar Nurgozhay for this first fight, and I'm going with the tick machine. Diyar, he absolutely got his hype shut down before it even started in the UFC, in his UFC debut. After that fight with Brendan Ribeiro he had, I told myself I'm never betting on an out of shape fighter ever again in my life. And that's been working out for me. Until I see a fighter get a six pack, I'm not gonna bet on him. Unless it's Daniel Cormier, but before DR, before Diyar's debut, he looked really good in his previous fights. He was looking like a wrecking ball machine in all of his fights, but losing his debut to Ribeiro really wasn't a good look. And he also missed weight in that fight. And he had a weight advantage as well. So, but to be fair, Brendan Ribeiro, he is a bit of a wild card in my opinion. You never know with him. He might look locked in versus an up and coming prospect one day, and he could be going to a split decision with Kyle Machado the next day. But he made Nurgozhay look like a rookie in my opinion. And I mean, the striking was better for Ribeiro. The jiu-jitsu was obviously so much better, and I just think it was a fair learning experience for Nurgozhay though. But um, you know, I thought when Nurgozhay realized that the striking was favoring Ribeiro, he decided to go to the wrestling, and I thought, okay, he's actually a smart fighter and he's going to win this fight. But then he gets caught with that sick Kimura submission. But I don't think he lacks fight IQ because that was a smart move from him to move into the wrestling. And he was doing pretty well in the wrestling before getting caught in the Kimura. On the other hand, I wasn't a fan of Uran Bekov's fight IQ in his last fight with Martin Buday. He landed a nice combination in that fight with the strikes. He had Buday a bit wobbled and he decided to go for a takedown, which allowed Buday to recover and ultimately win the fight. And in his striking, it did look good in parts of the fight, but I would say it's a bit more it's a bit more on the reckless side, throwing shots that leave him unbalanced, which you can say the same thing about Nurgozhay as well, but I do think Nurgozhay's striking will look better here in this matchup, and not only that, I do think Nurgozhay can outdog him in the wrestling as well, so or he can at least push Uran Sadibelidov against the fence if he has to, if the striking isn't going Nurgozhay's way. Because keep in mind, Uran, he will be having a 5-inch reach advantage here. So Uran should aim to keep this fight on the outside and try to find success like how Ribeiro did. But I do think Nurgozhay will be able to use his aggression to close the distance and land some power bombs. And overall, I think he's the more complete fighter out of the two. Like, he was manhandling Ribeiro in his last fight, and yeah, in the wrestling, he was manhandling him, but he got caught in the Kimura because Ribeiro, he has some crazy good jiu-jitsu. And despite Uran having a reach advantage, I still think Nurgozhay has a speed advantage here, and I think Nurgozhay can land some power bombs and be durable enough to take some of Uran's best shots, and he can always resort to the wrestling as well. So, yeah, the pick is Diyar. I think he's gonna be more aggressive, and he's a powerful striker slash wrestler, and I just think he has the more complete skill set, and he's also much faster in my opinion as well. So then you have Uran, who he is a bit reckless in the striking, questionable fight IQ, and he does have a big reach advantage in this matchup, which he could use to his advantage, but I just think Diyar will be able to close the distance and outdog Uran in the wrestling, and I think he'll win with pressure and wrestling if he needs to. So moving on to the next fight, we got Long Zhao versus Su Young Yu. I'm just kidding. That's not Long Zhao. You can't tell me Long Zhao doesn't look like a Roblox character. Like they look the exact same. Um, so my pick for this fight, I'm going with Su Young Yu to win this fight. Um, you know, Long Zhao, he's coming over. He's coming off of a nice knockout win over Kwang Lee, which was a good fight for as long as it lasted. Uh, both guys landed on each other and they had success, but Long ended up getting the better of the exchanges, and after he broke down Kwang Lee, throughout the fight, Lee land what's his name? Long landed a nice right hand that put him down. And before that fight, he was in an even closer fight with Chang Ho Lee, which was an even bigger war, right? Where he got landed on, and he landed some nice shots as well. It could have gone either way. In that fight, Chang Ho, he was able to land some nice knees in the clinch, and ultimately, I think that's what was the difference maker. So that's why he lost that fight. So Long Zhao, he was a dog in both of his UFC fights, and the only thing was in his last fight versus Kwang Lee, he got the knockout because Kwang Lee seemed visibly drained and he couldn't hang in there, which led to Long getting the knockout. But with Chang Ho Lee, Chang Ho Lee was able to hang in there and fight to the very end. And ultimately, he got the nod for landing, I guess, the more damaging strikes. So Long, he's fighting Su Young Yu, and I think Yu can actually not get drained throughout the fight and land some dominant takedowns in this fight. He's coming off of a dominant grappling performance where he lasted all three rounds, landing takedown after takedown, despite being the smaller guy in the fight, just like how he'll be the smaller guy in this matchup as well. I think that won't matter. I don't think that will matter. I think Young Yu, he can hang with Long in the striking. He won't get tired and continue pursuing takedowns or even grind him up against the fence if he has to. And before this fight, Young Yu not only showed great takedowns and dominant grappling, he showed he can strike really nicely as well. And that's why I think he can hang with Long even in the feet. Uh, so Yu does a good job using his feints, for he does a good job feinting his using his feints, and that's kind of how he sets up his takedowns, and then he lands up strikes up top as well. Yu finds openings in the strikes, and I think he's the much more better overall fighter, and I think he's more dialed in as a complete fighter, more measured in his approach. His strikes are composed, he's smart and dominant with the takedowns. I think Yu, despite being the smaller guy, can replicate some success in the clinch work as well, just like how Cheng Ho did versus Long Zhao. So ultimately, the pick is Su Young Yu. I think Zhao is durable. He has dangerous hands, but he's hittable, and he'll fade if the opponent holds up. You know, well, if he doesn't break you down, then you still have a very high chance against him. And against someone like you, he's very well rounded. He's a dominant grappler. He can last all three rounds, and he has very composed striking and high fight IQ. So I just think Yu is going to use pressure, get the takedowns, and control to grind out the rounds. You know, that's kind of his style. So moving on to the next fight, we got Zha Yi versus Westin Wilson. So my pick is Zha Yi. So right off the bat, you can see that there's a major height difference here. You have Zha Yi at 5'6" fighting Westin Wilson at 6'1", who looks like he should be working at IT. He should have been casted in the office with Michael Scott as an accountant. You know, both of these guys haven't looked good in the UFC. Zha Yi fought his first UFC fight in 2023 versus Zhang Young Lee, where he landed 5 out of 21 takedown attempts, which shows he is persistent in getting the takedowns, and he gathered up about 8 minutes of control time, but ultimately it was a striking disadvantage that led to his loss in his first UFC fight, which was a close fight, but the judges scored damage over control time in that one, like they should in every fight. Uh, and then in 2024, Zha Yi had his second UFC fight with Gabriel Santos, where again he was outstruck significantly, but he couldn't land a single takedown in that second UFC fight. You know, he went 0-4, and he himself got taken down twice. So, excuse me. But Gabriel Santos is a decent fighter. So it's not the worst loss. But outside of those two UFC losses, Zha Yi showed really strong wrestling, and he's very capable of dominating fights on the mat. And I think he just ran into two decent opponents on his first two UFC fights. So, on the other hand, you have Westin Wilson, who also had a really unfortunate two-fight UFC run where he ran into Gene Silva and Joe Anderson Brito, both finishing him in the first round. But after that, he ran into possibly the worst UFC fighter of all time, and he was able to submit Jekka Sergei in the first round. So it's hard to get a read on Westin Wilson because he lost really badly to guys who are very high caliber, and he dominated someone that isn't UFC level at all. But in this matchup with Zha Yi, I think both guys are going to want to try to utilize their wrestling, but Zha Yi being the much shorter guy, leads me to believe that Zha Yi will be the one having more success in doing so. You know, as a tall guy, it's harder to get down on the shorter guy's hips, where for Zha Yi, he doesn't have to reach down to get to Wilson's hips. He can just drive forward and he's already there. So, and as for the striking, we've seen Wilson is not very durable. He's getting knocked out back to back in the first round by two heavy hitters. So ideally for Wilson, he would maintain his range and pick apart Zha Yi from distance. But we've seen guys be able to close the distance on him. And uh, yeah, but even then, Wilson being that much taller, he only has a 2-inch reach advantage, which isn't much considering the height difference. So, and Wilson, he doesn't have good takedown defense. You know, he has a 33% takedown defense rate, which for a wrestler is a great number because they know they can use that. Like for a wrestler fighting him, it's a great number because they know they can use that against him. So, for someone like Zha Yi, he's definitely going in there and trying to get those takedowns and dominate the control time, which I think he will be able to do. So, you know, Zha Yi, he's a persistent wrestler. He struggles versus good strikers, but he's durable and scrappy against their durable and scrappy. I don't think he's going to have that problem that he had in his first two UFC fights with Westin Wilson, who's very tall, but he just has very poor durability and really bad takedown defense. So I just think Zha Yi will be relentlessly taking him down over and over him and grinding him out for a decision. He'll be grinding him out for a decision or a late finish. So moving on to the next fight, we got Michel Pereira versus Kyle Daukaus. I'm taking Michel Pereira. So Michel Pereira, he's coming off of two losses. One to Anthony Hernandez, which is completely understandable. He got ragdolled in that fight. And the most recent one to Abus Magomedov, which at the time, it seemed really weird. You know, he didn't look himself in that fight. Lots of people thought he would win that fight, but he looked off in that fight. But now looking back at it, Abus isn't a bad fighter. You know, I found out that Abus is training with Islam Dulatov. You know, they're both from Germany and they share the same religion. And Uslam Dulatov, he's a mother fricker. So Abus isn't actually it's he's actually not a bad fighter, and his losses in the UFC are to Kyle Bahario and Sean Strickland. So just like the Anthony Hernandez loss, not a bad loss to have on your record for if you're losing to Abus Magomedov, right? Uh, where on the other hand, we got Kyle Daukaus, who is making his second UFC debut. You know, his first UFC debut was in 2020, where he went 2-4. He gets cut in 2 years later in 2022. Then in 2023 to 2024, he gets 4 wins in a row. And 2025, he's back in the UFC. But I did a little research on those guys. That he was able to get 4 wins in a row on, and it's just very low caliber competition. Nothing impressive at all. So in my opinion, nothing really has changed. I still think he isn't UFC level, where you have Michel Pereira who has proved he's UFC level. You know, he was on an 8 fight win streak in the UFC before those 2 losses that he just had, losing to good fighters most recently. And after an 8 fight win streak, I think going on an 8 fight win streak is more impressive than going 2-4, then beating four nobodies to get back into the UFC. You know, ultimately he went 2-4 in his debut and then beats some low caliber competition to get back in the UFC. I think that 8 fight win streak that Michel Pereira had is much more impressive. So I think someone like Kyle Daukaus, Michel's flashy striking, it will work. It's gonna be able to work against him. You know, I just think Michel Pereira, he can end this quickly and early, and Kyle doesn't have the best striking defense. You know, he gets hit often, and I think that's the way Michel gets the job done here. But even on the mat, if this fight goes to the ground, Michel Pereira is skilled enough to be able to submit him as well. So I just think Kyle will definitely try to get this fight on the ground. But I just think Michel, he has high takedown defense, and I think he will be able to show levels in this fight. I think Michel is levels above in his striking and his takedown defense. It should come through here. So the pick is Michel Pereira. You know, he's a flashy striker. I think it's gonna work against him, and he's UFC proven. You know, he had a solid 8 fight win streak in the UFC, and he does have solid takedown defense. So Daukaus, you know, he was 2-4. He kind of had like a padded 4 win return. So I just think nothing really has changed, and he's too hittable. And so I just think Michel Pereira, he's levels above, and this will likely end in an early knockout. Moving on to the next fight, we got Zhu Rong versus Austin Hubbard. My pick is Zhu Rong for this fight. Zhu Rong is one of those guys that's actually improving in his overall game, and he didn't show the best striking versus Chris Padilla. But then for the Cody Steele fight, he transitioned from American Top Team and went to City Kickboxing, which was definitely a great move. You know, it showed major improvement in his overall game. He showed great striking in his next fight versus Cody Steele. That's something to appreciate about him. I mean, he dominated Cody Steele. His timing came along. His accuracy was impressive. His footwork improved. And he's also 25 years old, which means he still has time to improve his game even more. And Zhu Rong, he's another fighter that got cut and made it back to the UFC. You know, his striking now at this new team with City Kickboxing, I think it was just definitely a great move for the Cody Steele fight. His strikes are looking powerful and sharp, and overall in his game, we've seen his wrestling. It's opportunistic. He'll take you down when the opportunity presents itself, and you know he's a finisher. He's aggressive. He's coming to hurt you, which can leave him open to absorbing strikes, but when he hits you, his shots are intentional and he's trying to hurt you, you know? Then you have Austin Hubbard on the other hand, who was also cut from the UFC from 2019 to 2021. He went 3-4 in the UFC. Then he beats two random guys and comes back in the UFC in 2023, but now he's 1-3 in the UFC. In his second UFC run. So he showed no major improvements. He's still the same fighter he's always been. Very tough fighter, but you know, he's never been knocked out or TKO'd. You know, he comes forward and he puts a lot of boxing pressure on his opponents, but he can get outboxed, and he does try to go for takedowns. You know, his background is actually in wrestling, but there hasn't been much success trying to use his wrestling. They get stuffed pretty often, and he went 0 for 12 on his takedowns versus Alexander Hernandez, which isn't the worst stat, but he also lost to because Alexander Hernandez just beat what's his name, the Gooner guy. Uh, I'm blanking his name. Chase Gooner, Chase Hooper. Yeah, so Alexander Hernandez, he stuffed 12 of his takedowns, but Austin Hubbard, he also lost to Kurt Halaba, which isn't a great look. So I just think Zhu Rong is on the rise right now, and Austin Hubbard is on a downward slope in this stage of his career. So there's a major difference in momentum and even skill. Based on their last performances alone, Zhu looked really good. His boxing is crisp. His transition to city kickboxing is a great move for him, and coming up against a below average Austin Hubbard, this should be easy work for Zhu to stuff any takedown attempts and land the more devastating shots. And I think Zhu can use Austin Hubbard's aggressiveness against him here because Austin likes to push the pace and pressure opponents um, with his strikes. But this new version of Zhu Rong, I think he can definitely capitalize on that and catch him coming in and disrupt his rhythm and just put a beating on him and avoid any takedown attempts. So uh, plus, Zhu Rong, he's only 25 years old. He's improving at this new team at City Kickboxing, his crisp boxing, and he's a dangerous finisher. Where Tough Hubbard, or Austin Hubbard, he's tough, but he's limited. Poor takedown success, and he gets outboxed pretty often. So I just think Zhu Rong's going to be able to shut down the wrestling and land the sharper strikes. Moving on to Loner Kavanagh versus Charles Johnson. My pick is Loner Kavanagh for this fight. Uh, in my opinion, this is the main event for me. This is the main event of the evening. I'm not sure why this fight is so far down in the card. Personally, this is my main event. If you didn't know, Loner Kavanagh, he's actually Chinese. I think he was born in the UK, but his mom is actually Chinese as frick. So anyway, obviously Loner Kavanagh, undefeated fighter. He looks great in all his fights. Before his debut, he was known as a super quick knockout artist. He's fast, he's like the speed of lightning, and he gets into the Contender Series, knocks out a highly touted prospect, hits a backflip, lands it, wins his UFC debut using his striking versus Cortes-Acosta, then fights Felipe dos Santos in his most recent fight. And in that fight, he showed such a complete game in his arsenal. Dos Santos, he was having some success on the feet, landing some nice shots, putting the pressure on Kavanagh, but Kavanagh was determined to win, landing shots when he could and dominating him with the takedowns in rounds 2 and 3. So, in my opinion, that was just such an impressive, well-rounded performance, and it showed how complete of a fighter he is. So, he's one of my most favorite fighters in the UFC right now. He's going to have a height disadvantage here, but that's nothing new to him. Every opponent he faces is always much taller than him, and he knows how to use that in his advantage in most cases. He's fighting Charles Johnson, who, on the opposite hand, he's usually taller than all of his opponents. He's 5'9", which is super tall for the flyweight division, and he's coming off of a loss to another great prospect where he wasn't able to land anything significant. He was the one eating the heavier shots in that fight throughout the fight, which is why he lost. But before that, though, he was on a 4-fight win streak with a win over Joshua Van, but that Joshua Van fight, it was close, and they both accepted that fight on short notice, and it was competitive. And before that 4-fight win streak, Johnson was on a 3-fight losing streak. So his career has been down and up, and I think it's going to go back down. Facing another great prospect right now, right after just facing one in his previous fight. I just think Loner has him beat. I think Loner can do anything he can do, but in a much more quicker, faster, stronger, more powerful way. And despite the height difference, I think Loner can pick him apart. Stay on the outside, move in, land some nice shots, swift out of the way. Like Loner Kavanagh has some really nice footwork. He moves really well. And Johnson, he's good at using his length, putting up some nice volume. So I wouldn't be surprised if Loner decides to take him down throughout the fight. But if they strike, I know Loner is super quick, super powerful, extremely accurate. Like, he will definitely be landing the more convincing shots, in my opinion, the more powerful shots. Charles, he can outvolume him, but it won't be enough compared to the power when Loner lands on Charles Johnson. So, Loner Kavanagh coming in with the undefeated momentum. He's fast, he's powerful, and he's been showing such a complete game. His striking coming along with his wrestling, mixing in the two. I think that's very impressive. But you have Johnson, who is tall, he's rangy, but I just think he's very inconsistent. And versus these prospects, I think he's gonna get outgunned by higher level prospects, so, like someone on the level of Loner Kavanagh. I just think he hasn't beat. I think Loner's faster, stronger. He's gonna land the more convincing shots, and he's gonna mix down takedowns. He's gonna mix in takedowns if he needs to. So pick as Loner Kavanagh. Next up on the fight, we got Maheshate Hayisaer versus Gage Young. I'm going Gage Young to win this fight. We got Maheshate. He's a pretty well-rounded fighter. He has strong wrestling, strong striking. He has a decent power. He's more of a kickboxer more than anything else. But he had that sick knockout over Steve Garcia, which has aged really nicely. He face planted Steve Garcia early in the first round, and we see what Steve Garcia is doing now. Running through everyone. But and he's not only a striker. He can wrestle. But he he does get taken down often, and his striking defense isn't the best either. But yeah, he's susceptible to being hit. But and the thing about him is um, after that Steve Garcia knockout win that he had, he loses to Rafa Garcia, then he loses to Vyacheslav Borisov, which really killed any hype that he had. He got taken down over and over, and the way he beat Maheshate, or the way to beat Maheshate, is to not overextend on your punches, because Maheshate, he's a counter striker. He's a really good counter striker, but all you have to do is not overextend on your punches and then take him down, and you can pretty much beat him. So then you have Gage Young on the other hand, who he is a strong wrestler and he has strong power in his hands, and he likes to be aggressive. He likes to come forward, which could potentially cost him here, but he's durable and never been knocked out. So he also does a good job managing distance. He fights behind his jab and using kicks to gauge distance. He did just lose to Evan Elder, who's been in the game, a decent fighter. He lost to, someone you can consider a veteran compared to Gage Young. So in this fight, we have two 25-year-olds going at it, and I'm leaning with Gage Young because Maheshate, he likes to be a little too reckless. He hangs in the pocket too much, and I feel like he gets hit too often. And on top of that, Maheshate hasn't shown great takedown defense as well. So someone like Gage Young, he can take advantage of that while landing some nice overhand bombs. So I'm leaning with the durability of Gage Young and his ability to land big in this fight. And him being the shorter guy, allows him to get in on the hips, easier to get the takedown. And I feel as the fight goes on, Gage Young will be more in his groove and start picking up the pace as the fight goes on. He seems very motivated right now, and I think he comes through here against the hometown guy in Maheshate. So Maheshate, he is a strong striker. He has the knockout power, but I think he has weak takedown defense, and he has reckless defense in his striking as well. And Young, he's the durable, more aggressive guy, and I think he has solid wrestling, and he's improving with his distance control. So Gage Young, I think he's gonna use the pressure and use his takedowns to wear Maheshate down, and he's gonna be able to land big shots in this fight. So moving on to our next fight, we got Nueraji Taiyilake versus Kiefer Crosbie. My pick is Nueraji Taiyilake. Taiyilake. Nueraji Taiyilake. I think Nueraji is going to go Super Saiyan. That's his nickname, Super Saiyan. Let's call him Super Saiyan. I can see him reaching that level of Super Saiyan in this fight. He has multiple first round finishes. Of course, none of them are UFC level because this is his debut, but that's exactly what Crosbie is. He isn't UFC level. He's 2-0. He's 0-2. I mean, in the UFC, he got finished in the first round both times, and he's a Bellator guy, and he was struggling in Bellator as well. And the thing about Kiefer is that on some websites, he's listed as 5'9". Other websites have him as 6 foot, and I saw him at 5'11" in one website. So I know he'll be the much older fighter by about 11 years, which is pretty significant coming up against a young, hungry competitor in his hometown. And I do know he'll be the shorter guy, but I'm not sure how significant the height difference will be. It can either be a 2 inch, 2 inch. It can either be 2 inches shorter or it could be about 6 inches shorter, which is a big difference. Regardless, though, he will be the shorter guy, and he will be the older guy. That's for sure. And I think Super Saiyan will go Super Saiyan on him and finish him in the first round in his hometown. In Super Saiyan's hometown. Super Saiyan, he's an aggressive striker. He likes to come forward and he likes to finish you. 11 wins, 11 finishes, 10 knockouts, one submission, which is nice to see. And the thing about this guy, he's powerful, but he's putting up numbers with volume. He's landing 11 significant strikes per minute, and that's an insane number. And granted, his fights aren't lasting too long, which is why the significant strikes per minute is so high. But still, he's coming forward and he puts pressure on you. He's 6'2" with a 76-inch reach, which is a great frame. And he's fighting Kiefer Crosbie. His nickname isn't as cool as Super Saiyan. His nickname is BDK. If you want to know what that stands for, I'll tell you. Get ready to cringe. It's Big Daddy King. Like, who told him that was a good idea? Uh, the thing is, Kiefer Crosbie, he's primarily a striker and he's not a very good one. He's coming up against a young, hungry, skilled striker like Super Saiyan. That's gonna be bad news for Big Daddy King, right? So he's too willing to engage in a striking battle, and I see him getting hit really badly here. Uh, I would be worried for Super Saiyan here just because we haven't seen him in the UFC level and he lacks experience and he's fighting someone that's 11 years older than him with tons of experience. But we've seen what Crosby brings to the table, which we know that we've seen that he's not UFC level, and I feel like Super Saiyan can go Super Saiyan against him. He'll bring overwhelming pressure with strikes. Fighting in his hometown as well. Crosby, he gets hit too often, and this should be a first round knockout for Super Saiyan. So the pick is Super Saiyan. 11 finishes. All his wins are by finish, and he just has a huge frame, 6'2", 76-inch reach. He's fighting an 0-2 UFC fighter, who's been finished in both of his losses in the UFC, and I just don't think he's UFC level. So I just think Super Saiyan is going to overwhelm Crosby early, and most likely a first round knockout in this fight. Moving on to our next fight, we do have Shu Mudaerji versus Kevin Borjas. I'm taking Shu Mudaerji to win this fight. So 3 out of Shu Mudaerji's 4 UFC losses have come by being submitted. The only time he lost and wasn't submitted, he was fighting Charles Johnson, which is a decent striker. Kevin Borjas, he's primarily a striker, so this fight will take place on the feet. And if that's the case, I can see Shu Mudaerji using his length to keep Borjas at bay. I think Kevin is going to have a hard time dealing with the length of Shu. And the way that Shu strikes, he's like a sniper. He'll snipe you and then move away. And he's not so willing to stand in the pocket and trade. And fighting against someone like Kevin Borjas, who needs to close the distance in order to get in order to get on the inside and land his shots, that's essential. Shu is gonna be smart enough to disengage after landing his shots, move back, and let Kevin chase him around the octagon because he knows how to use his range control. Like, he has good distance management, and I feel like he's going to out volume Kevin in this matchup. If Kevin lands a big shot, I still don't think that'll be enough because Su is super durable. You know, he's never been knocked out. And if Kevin decides to shoot in for a takedown, which isn't something he's known for, you know, he has zero submission wins in his career. And Su has nice scrambles. And yes, he was submitted 3 out of 4 UFC losses, but he can still scramble really nicely against a guy who's primarily a striker. And of course, Su has to watch out for that big overhand right of Kevin, who will probably have the more powerful shots between the two. But I do think he's going to land often on. But I don't think he's going to land often on the tall, rangy striker like Su. I think Su's volume will overpowers Kevin's attempt at power bombs. So and one thing about Su is that he's never been knocked out, you know? He's never been finished via strikes, which is something you love to see in this matchup where the shorter guy, he needs to close the distance and land those power bombs in order to win. But he's fighting a rangy striker who doesn't stand in the pocket and he moves around. He's never been finished via strikes. And Kevin Borjas needs to either knock him out, be the first person to knock him out, which is super unlikely. Uh, he's going to have to submit him. And Kevin Borjas has zero submission wins. And if this fight goes the distance, which it probably will, Su would have landed enough shots from range to win the fight, to win himself the fight on the judges' scorecards. So I just think Mudaerji's long and rangy striking is going to help him here. He has good distance control and he's never been knocked out, right? So where he only has to deal with Kevin Borjas power punching and he's going to have to close the distance in order to win the fight, which I see him having a hard time doing so. And there's no real grappling threat from Kevin. So I just think Su is going to be able to outvolume Borjas at range and he'll most likely win a decision. Moving on to our next fight, we got Sergei Pavlovich versus Waldo Cortes-Acosta. I'm going with Waldo Cortes-Acosta. This is actually such a good fight. You know, I picked Waldo to win in his last fight where he was an underdog against Sergey Spivak. And I think I'm going to pick him here. You know, Sergey Pavlovich, he's no joke though. After losing his debut in the first round versus Alistair Overeem by TKO, excuse me, uh, he went after losing by TKO his debut to Alistair Overeem. He went on a 6-fight win streak, finishing every single one of his fights in the very first round by knockout. Then Tom Aspinall put an end to that streak where he knocked him out. Tom Aspinall knocked him out. Then Pavlovich lost to Alexander Volkov by decision, and now most recently, Pavlovich is coming off of his first decision win in the UFC against Jairzinho Rozenstruik. So we know that Pavlovich, he's a dangerous striker. He's super fast. He has that killer instinct. He has wrestling in his arsenal as well, but he doesn't use it often. You know, he has zero submission wins in his career. And he's just a big dude. He's an aggressive finisher. And Waldo is essentially the same type of fighter. He's a big dude. He's a heavy hitter, but I think he's more calculated. He's not as willing to stand in the pocket and trade, while Pavlovich isn't as measured in his strikes. I think Waldo is a smart fighter, more willing to go to a decision win over rushing a knockout, over trying to rush a knockout and win that way. That could cost him getting knocked out in the process. You know, I just think Waldo can slow the fight down to his pace, stay composed, and stick to the game plan. I think Waldo is smart enough to know Pavlovich wants an early knockout, and he does a good job not getting caught in those firefights. I mean, Waldo, he has never been knocked out or submitted, like never been finished at all. And I feel he's constantly improving in his overall game. Uh, and this is definitely the toughest test to date on his career. And he's on a 5-fight win streak right now. I think he's in his groove right now. And I think his fight IQ will allow him to dictate the pace, you know, keep the fight where he wants it and use the clinch in moments when he's in trouble, you know. He'll probably take Pavlovich too deep into the third round and win the fight as it goes on, probably by decision. I think Waldo is just a much more complete fighter. I think he'll be able to weather an early storm and allow his boxing skills to win him this fight. Mix uh, mix in some pushes against the cage if he has to and wear down Pavlovich as the fight goes on. So I just think Pavlovich, he is very explosive. He has that early round knockout power. He's a knockout machine. But I think as the fight goes on, it will favor Waldo Cortes-Acosta, who is a smart fighter. He's a patient boxer and he's undefeated in with his durability. Never been finished, and he's constantly improving. So I just think he's going to be able to weather an early storm, and then he'll be able to dictate the pace. And I think he might edge out a decision in this one. So moving on to our next fight. We do have Aljamain Sterling versus Brian Ortega. So these are two fighters that we're pretty familiar with. I'm going to pick Aljamain Sterling. At this point, we're familiar with these fighters, right? At least in my eyes, Ortega, he's a skilled kind of like a street fighter. Uh, he doesn't do well against number one contenders or championship fights. Like Ortega, he's good, but he's not championship level good. And I feel Aljo, he still has that championship level skill set that can cause Ortega a lot of trouble. And I mean that last fight he was in, Aljamain, it was a really close fight with Mavzar Evloev. In my opinion, it wasn't a robbery or anything like that. Aljo lost the fight, but he still did really good against an undefeated Russian who's 9-0 in the UFC. And if that's the Aljo that shows up for this fight, I think he can definitely wear down Brian Ortega, who, like I said, isn't on the who isn't on a championship level caliber. And I don't think Ortega can hang with those elite guys. And Aljo, he still has that elite grappling and wrestling, and he's smart enough to realize the dangerous submission game that Ortega brings to the fight. And Aljo's striking is coming along as well. And I think uh, compared to Ortega's street fighting boxing style, I feel Aljo will be the much more technical guy in the striking. He has a ton of championship experience here as well. So Ortega has proven that he can't hang with that high of a level uh in those high level fights. So but of course, Ortega, he's still going to bring a dangerous submission game that if you're not careful, he can easily, just catch you off guard and choke you. And one thing about Ortega is that he's super durable as well. He can take a beating and still come forward, but I don't think that will even matter here. I don't think Aljo is going to style on him with strikes. I think he could if he wants to, but I just think Aljo is going to ragdoll him. I think Aljo is super strong. He's still in shape, elite grappling in his arsenal. And this is going to be a battle of who can utilize their game plan, who can utilize their wrestling in their favor. And I just think Aljo is the much more better wrestler and the smarter fighter here as well. So, you know, his striking defense is also better than Ortega's, in my opinion. He's the much more smarter fighter than Ortega. He knows how to position himself in winnable positions, where Ortega, he takes too many chances, and in those high caliber fights, Ortega looks like he kind of hopes for a miracle win with those with a submission, like in those championship fights, versus Max Holloway. He really didn't have anything uh dangerous in that fight versus or Volkanovski. He needed that submission win, but then Volkanovski escaped and then continued to do what he was doing. So I think Aljo, he's just a much better fighter. I think he should dominate this fight with his wrestling, using his strikes to set up the wrestling and take advantage of Ortega's lack of defense. And Ortega, like I said, he still has a chance of pulling off a random submission win out of nowhere. But Aljo, I think he's high level enough to know that uh he has to avoid something like that, and he knows how to avoid something like that, and that's really the only way I see him winning this fight. I can't picture Ortega landing a knockout. That's the only way I can see Ortega winning this fight, by a miracle submission, right? And I can't picture Ortega landing a knockout shot on Aljo, and Aljo's smart enough to avoid the submissions, right? So once this fight goes the distance, Aljo would have been in so many dominant positions already and have taken him down and worn him down so many times, enough to the point where he's going to win that fight in the decision. He has elite wrestling and grappling, and he has very technical striking. Plus, he's proven versus top contenders, where Brian Ortega, he has that dangerous submission game. He's durable, but I feel like in those high level moments, in those high caliber fights, he relies on such a limited skill set, in my opinion. Like he needs like that miracle moment where Aljamain is completely different. You know, he has the IQ, he has the tools to win this fight, and I think he's going to ragdoll Ortega with the wrestling, and he's probably going to win the decision here. He could get the submission too as well. You know, maybe by getting the backpack, the human backpack, and then getting that rear naked choke. It'll probably be a decision though. Moving on to our next fight, we got Johnny Walker versus Zhang Mingyang. I'm picking Zhang Mingyang to win this fight. So Zhang Mingyang on a 12 fight finishing streak right now. Every single one of those 12 wins in a row have ended in the first round. This guy is an absolute beast. Coming up against a very chinny Johnny Walker who's been knocked out by too many people now. I have a feeling this won't end well for Johnny. You know, when you take a look at Johnny Walker's career, his most notable win, in my opinion, was his debut win versus Khalil Rountree, where, you know, that elbow that he hit him with in the clinch and then dropped him. That was impressive, which was in 2018. But other than that, nothing really too impressive in terms of victories over anyone. You know, I'm actually convinced that after his debut win, when he went on after that debut win, he went on his next two fights, finishing his next two fights both in less than 30 seconds. And in that third fight in the UFC, when he hit that celebration and injured his shoulder, I'm convinced that changed that celebration changed the trajectory of his career. You know, he wasn't the same fighter after that injury where he did that celebration and hurt his shoulder. Because after that third UFC fight, it was pretty much all downhill from there. You know, he gets TKO'd in his next fight. Um, he loses the decision right after that, and then after that one, he beats Ryan Spann, but that's not impressive. Then he loses his next two after that. Then he actually goes on a three-fight win streak against mid-caliber opponents, and now he's on a two-fight losing streak, losing back-to-back by knockout. The guy's chin, it's done in my opinion. His fighting ability and his fighting instincts, it isn't the same anymore. I don't think it is. And you know, he's still a dangerous striker. You know, he towers over almost every opponent he fights. He's just a physical monster with a big frame. You know, he's a long reach, and he still has that unpredictable striking. Uh, Not as unpredictable so much nowadays, but I feel like round one knockout is written in the stars in this fight. You know, every single clue, all the flags are pointing to a first round finish for Min Yang here. You know, Johnny Walker is getting knocked out by any gust of wind. And I feel someone with the power and accuracy and momentum that Min Yang has right now, how can we not pick him to win this fight? You know, especially fighting in China in his hometown, right? I believe he's Chinese. The thing is though, Johnny Walker's brother, he has been doing so well recently in the UFC. Maybe he's trying to get him to have a new approach, maybe in his fighting style. Maybe he's teaching Johnny Walker that heel hook submission. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think it's two different styles, the way they fight. You know, Johnny and his brother. Johnny's a man, a wild man. He puts himself out there and he likes to be explosive. And he's proven he can get knocked out by getting his chin touched. And I do believe this guy, Min Yang, will touch his chin at least once, if not more than once. And just one, I believe, will be enough to put his lights out. So the pick is going to be Zhang Mingyang. You know, you gotta give respect to Walker. He has that huge frame. He is explosive. I just think his chin is gone, and he has multiple knockout losses, and that's not good fighting Zhang Mingyang. You know, on a 12 fight finishing streak, all in the first round. He's very powerful and accurate. I think he's going to be able to land at least one devastating shot in the first round, get the round one knockout, and I don't think Walker's durability will be able to hold. So that concludes my picks for this week's UFC card. Let me know what you guys thought. Let me know who you are rolling with and drop your predictions down below. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my picks or if you thought they were terrible. I'd love to see what y'all thought. As always, I hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a great day. I love you guys. That's it for me. I'm out. Peace.